It may seem paradoxical to quote in connection with the priest of Cheironeia such a pure rationalist as Mr. Herbert Spencer. Yet when we read, as the last message of modern science, that when the equation of life has been reduced to its lowest terms, the symbols are symbols still, mere signs, that is, of the unknown reality which underlies all matter and all spirit, we may feel how over the wide strait of centuries thought calls to thought, and how Plutarch has a higher position than is usually claimed for him in the progress of the Greek intellect. And indeed it seems that not merely the importance of Plutarch himself, but also the land of his birth and the evolution of Greek civilization has been passed over by modern critics. To us, indeed, the bare rock to which the Parthenon serves as a crown, and which lies between Colonus and Attica's violet hills, will always be the holiest spot in the land of Greece, and Delphi will come next, and then the meadows of Eurotas, where that noble people lived who represented in Hellenic thought the reaction of the law of duty against the law of beauty, the opposition of conduct to culture. Yet, as one stands on the divided road of Cithaeron and looks out on the great double plains of Boeotia, the enormous importance of the division of Hellas comes to one's mind with great force. To the north is Orchomenus and Minian treasure house, seat of those merchant princes of Phoenicia, who brought to Greece the knowledge of letters and the art of working in gold. Thebes is at our feet with the gloom of the terrible legends of Greek tragedy still lingering about it, the birthplace of Pindar, the nurse of Epaminondas and the sacred band. And from out of the plain where Mars loved to dance, rise the muses' haunt Helicon, by whose silver streams Corinna and Hesiod sang. While far away under the white aegis of these snow-capped mountains lies Cheironeia and the Lion Plains, where with vain chivalry the Greeks strove to check Macedon first and afterwards Rome. Cheironeia, where in the Martinmas summer of Greek civilization Plutarch rose from the drear waste of a dying religion, as the aftermath rises when the mowers think they have left the field bare. Greek philosophy began and ended in skepticism. The first and the last word of Greek history was faith. Splendid thus in its death, like winter sunsets, the Greek religion passed away into the horror of the night. For the Cimmerian darkness was at hand, and when the schools of Athens were closed and the statue of Athena broken, the Greek spirit passed from the gods and the history of its own land to the subtleties of defining the doctrine of the Trinity and the mystical attempts to bring Plato into harmony with Christ, and to reconcile Gethsemane and the Sermon on the Mount with the Athenian prison and the discussion in the woods of Colonus. The Greek spirit slept for well nigh 1,000 years. When it woke again like Antaeus, it had gathered strength from the earth where it lay. Like Apollo, it had lost none of its divinity through its long servitude. In the history of Roman thought, we nowhere find any of those characteristics of the Greek illumination which I have pointed out are the necessary concomitants of the rise of historical criticism. The conservative respect for tradition which made the Roman people delight in their ritual and formulas of law, and is as apparent in their politics as in their religion, was fatal to any rise of that spirit revolt against authority, the importance of which as a factor in intellectual progress we have already seen. The whitened tables of the pontifices preserved carefully the records of the eclipses and other atmospherical phenomena, and what we call the art of verifying dates was known to them at an early time, but there was no spontaneous rise of physical science to suggest by its analogies of law and order a new method of research, nor any natural springing up of the questioning spirit of philosophy with its unification of all phenomena and all knowledge. At the very time when the whole tide of Eastern superstition was sweeping into the heart of the capital, the Senate banished the Greek philosophers from Rome, and of the three systems which did at length take some root in the city, those of Zeno and Epicurus were merely used as the rule for the ordering of life, while the dogmatic skepticism of Carneades, by its very principles, annihilated the possibility of argument and encouraged a perfect indifference to research. Nor were the Romans ever fortunate enough, like the Greeks, to have to face the incubus of any dogmatic system of legends and myths, the immoralities and absurdities of which might excite a revolutionary outbreak of skeptical criticism. For the Roman religion became, as it were, crystallized and isolated from the progress at an early period of its evolution. Their gods remained mere abstractions of commonplace virtues, or uninteresting personifications of the useful things of life. The old primitive creed was indeed always upheld as a state institution, on account of the enormous facilities it offered for cheating in politics. But as a spiritual system of belief it was unanimously rejected at a very early period, both by the common people and the educated classes, for the sensible reason that it was so extremely dull. The former took refuge in the mystic sensualities of the worship of Isis, the latter in the stoical rules of life. The Romans classified their gods carefully in their order of precedence, analyzed their genealogies in the laborious spirit of modern heraldry, fenced them round with a ritual as intricate as their law, but never quite cared enough about them to believe in them. So it was of no account with them when the philosophers announced that Minerva was merely memory. She had never been much else. Nor did they protest when Lucretius dared to say of Ceres and of Liber that they were only the corn of the field and the fruit of the vine, for they had never mourned for the daughter of Demeter in the asphodel meadows of Sicily, nor traversed the glades of Cithaeron with fawn skin and with spear. This brief sketch of the condition of Roman thought will serve to prepare us for the almost total want of scientific historical criticism, which we shall discern in their literature, and has besides afforded fresh corroborations of the conditions essential to the rise of this spirit, and of the modes of thought which it reflects and in which it is always to be found. Roman historical composition had its origin in the Pontifical College of Ecclesiastical Lawyers, and preserved to its close the uncritical spirit which characterized its fountainhead. It possessed from the outset a most voluminous collection of the materials of history, which, however, produced merely antiquarians, not historians. It was so hard to use facts, so easy to accumulate them. Wearied of the dull monotony of the pontifical annals, which dwelt on little else but the rise and fall and provisions in the eclipses of the sun, Cato wrote out a history with his own hand for the instruction of his child, to which he gave the name of Origenes. And before his time, some aristocratic families had written histories in Greece, much in the same spirit in which the Germans of the 18th century used French as the literary language. But the first regular Roman historian is Sallust. Between the extravagant eulogies passed on this author by the French, such as de Closet and Dr. Mommsen's view of him as merely a political pamphleteer, it is perhaps difficult to reach the via media or middle way of unbiased appreciation. He has at any rate the credit of being a purely rationalistic historian, perhaps the only one in Roman literature. Cicero had a good many qualifications for a scientific historian, and as he usually did, thought very highly of his own powers. On passages of ancient legend, however, he is rather unsatisfactory, for while he is too sensible to believe them, he is too patriotic to reject them. And this is really the attitude of Livy, who claims for early Roman legend a certain uncritical homage from the rest of the subject world. His view in his history is that it is not worth while to examine the truth of these stories. In his hands the history of Rome unrolls before our eyes, like some gorgeous tapestry, where victory succeeds victory, where triumph treads on the heels of triumph, and the line of heroes seems never to end. It is not till we pass behind the canvas and see the slight means by which the effect is produced that we apprehend the fact that, like most picturesque writers, Livy is an indifferent critic. As regards his attitude towards the credibility of early Roman history, he is quite as conscious as we are of its mythical and unsound nature. He will not, for instance, decide whether the Horatii were Albans or Romans, who was the first dictator, how many tribunes there were, and the like. His method as a rule is merely to mention all the accounts, and sometimes to decide in favor of the most probable, but usually not to decide at all. No canons of historical criticism will ever discover whether the Roman women interviewed with the mother of Coriolanus of their own accord, or at the suggestion of the Senate, whether Remus was killed for jumping over his brother's wall or because they quarreled about birds, whether the ambassadors found Cincinnatus plowing or only mending a hedge. Livy suspends his judgment over these important facts and history, and when questioned on their truth, is dumb. If he does select between two historians, he chooses the one who is nearer to the facts he describes. But he is no critic, only a conscientious writer. It is mere vain waste to dwell on his critical powers, for they do not exist. In the case of Tacitus, imagination has taken the place of history. The past lives again in his pages, but through no laborious criticism, rather through a dramatic and psychological faculty which he specially possessed. In the philosophy of history he has no belief. He can never make up his mind what to believe as regards God's government of the world. There is no method in him, and none elsewhere in Roman literature. Nations may not have missions, but they certainly have functions. And the function of ancient Italy was not merely to give us what is statical in our institutions and rational in our law, but to blend into one elemental creed the spiritual aspirations of Arian and of Semite. Italy was not a pioneer in intellectual progress, nor a motive power in the evolution of thought. The owl of the goddess of wisdom traversed over the whole land and found nowhere a resting place. The dove, which is the bird of Christ, flew straight to the city of Rome, and the new reign began. It was the fashion of early Italian painters to represent, in medieval costume, the soldiers who watched over the tomb of Christ, and this which was the result of the frank anachronism of all true art, may serve to us as an allegory. For it was in vain that the Middle Ages strove to guard the buried spirit of progress. When the dawn of the Greek spirit arose, the sepulchre was empty, the grave clothes laid aside. Humanity had risen from the dead. The study of Greek, it has been well said, implies the birth of criticism, comparison, and research. At the opening of that education of modern by ancient thought, which we call the Renaissance, it was the words of Aristotle which sent Columbus sailing to the New World, while a fragment of Pythagorean astronomy sent Copernicus thinking on that train of reasoning which had revolutionized the whole position of our planet in the universe. Then it was seen that only the meaning of progress is a return to Greek modes of thought. The monkish hymns which obscured the pages of Greek manuscripts were blotted out. The splendors of a new method were unfolded to the world. And out of the melancholy sea of medievalism rose the free spirit of man in all that splendor of glad adolescence, when the bodily powers seem quickened by a new vitality, when the eye sees more clearly than its wont, and the mind apprehends what was before time hidden from it. To herald the opening of the 16th century, from the little Venetian printing press, came forth all the great authors of antiquity, each bearing on the title page the words, Aldo Manuzio, a Roman and a lover of Greece. Words which may serve to remind us with what wondrous prescience Polybius saw the world's fate, when he foretold the material sovereignty of Roman institutions, and exemplified in himself the intellectual empire of Greece. The course of the study of the spirit of historical criticism has not been a profitless investigation into modes and forms of thought, now antiquated and of no account. The only spirit which is entirely removed from us is the medieval. The Greek spirit is essentially modern. The introduction of the comparative method of research, which has forced history to disclose its secrets, belongs in a measure to us. Ours, too, is a more scientific knowledge of philology and the method of survival. Nor did the ancients know anything of the doctrine of averages, or of crucial instances, both of which methods have proved of such importance in modern criticism, the one adding a most important proof of the statical elements of history, and exemplifying the influences of all physical surroundings in the life of man, the other, as in the single instance of the Moulin-Quignon skull, serving to create a whole new science of prehistoric archaeology, and to bring us back to a time when man was coeval with the Stone Age, the mammoth, and the woolly rhinoceros. But except these, we have added no new canon or method to the science of historical criticism. Across the drear waste of 1,000 years, the Greek and modern spirit join hands. In the torch race, which the Greek boys ran from the Ceramatian field of death to the home of the goddess of wisdom, not merely he who first reached the goal, but also he who first started with the torch of flame received the prize. In the lampadiphoria of civilization and free thought, let us not forget to render due meed of honor to those who first lit that sacred flame, the increasing splendor of which lights our footsteps to the far-off divine event of the attainment of perfect truth.